Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Nature Folklore Sessions. It's the 28th of November, 2021. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us again for our weekly time of exploring nature-centered folklore, connecting this to within your favorite sanctuary space and expressing inspired visions from your sanctuary through your poetry, writing, art, craft, performance, and problem solving. And so today, this afternoon's theme is part 3 of this Barding series that I've been doing. And this is about crafting our visionary words into scribing. And I'm going to look at the possibilities of using Ogham. I got Ogham in the background, as you can see, as symbols of prompts. That's what I got on the green screen at the moment. And also how the crafts of medieval scribing onwards changed the expression of barding. Now, sorry, it's just me today. There's no guests, as I didn't find time to approach anyone this week. This summer, I would have loved to have invited for this topic. For instance, is Sean-Paul Patton. I would have loved to have him sometime on the show to talk about his poem, Ogham's book. That's the cover there. Look it up. Maybe next year when I do this again, we'll have Sean on board. I hope so. Great contribution to what I'm going to be talking about today. But it's me solo, and I hope you don't mind that. Now, from January, I hope to switch to these Nature Folklore Sundays as being very much more guest-driven. And then my solo stuff will go on to Patreon for the subscribers and for other subscribers, because that's not where all the subscribers are. And I'll talk more about that more on the Nature Folklore edition on 2nd of January next year. Now, these folklore sessions and the Carrowcrory Labyrinth Garden still brought to you largely by the Patreon subscribers, and I got my little banner below. And thank you, subscribers who are watching here today, or maybe tuning in a bit later, because your continued support is the reason that I'm here today and being able to fund and do this for you, which is great fun. So thank you very much for your support. And now let's see who's the early birds who's joined us already. And there we go. Let's see who's here. We've got Donna Johnson, who's up and about in New Mexico. Good morning to you, Donna. Lovely to have you aboard. Nobody else has left a message yet. So anybody else is there, do let us know that you're around. Fantastic that you're here. I hope it's all comfortable for you and not too wintry there for you, Donna. And now, one reason I'm going to go solo today with this subject is due to I have an extreme passion for this subject, and that's what I'm going to be covering today. And for this year only, I wish to share why this is and why this episode and the previous 2 Barding episodes are the foundation of everything that I do present around the year on Nature Folklore. Though the foundation of all this is, it has to be access to a tree sanctuary. Well, it has to be for me. So do I have a tree sanctuary coming up? Yeah, it is a nice one. Access to a tree sanctuary. It's wonderful. And yeah, talk about your tree sanctuary in the comments by all means. That'd be fabulous. What's actually moving you through your inspiration. And I posted a very gothic fawn video on Facebook a couple of days ago. It's from a YouTube link. It's Gàidhlig is its title, and it's quite a drama. That's a bit of a promotion picture from that. Obviously, I can't play the video because of the copyrights. I wish I could. And I couldn't understand the German in this video, of course, but I don't think you need to have actually followed through what it's about. And it was such a lovely drama. And it's close to what I'm thinking about and what I'm going to probably be presenting this afternoon. I thought that was a lovely coincidence to actually catch that video. And I understand Gàidhlig as being a prompt. It's about prompts that get us chanting, and through that chanting, it's an enchantment. So Gàidhlig is really an enchantment. That's the way I interpret it. A lot of people make it a bit more basic and just say, oh, it's about casting spells. And that's what casting spells is all about. But as I say, I can't include the full video. This is what they're putting up as a kind of promotion. It's going to be part of an album they're putting together called Pagan. It's coming out next June, I think. So while they can't do concerts much, they can't be live much because of the COVID, they're making these fantastic videos. Anyway, Gàidhlig is what that is, if I can move on. The visuals, though, it's a wonderful expression. If you go and see the video, look it up on YouTube. It's a lot of what I'm going to be sharing, and you might connect with what I've shared the last 2 Sundays as well. Now, last year when I did this session, I included quite a lot about the Iona scribes. And here's a picture of Iona, and whilst that's on, I might even change my green screen to a bit of Iona, since I'm going to be talking about that. Let's see if I can find my Iona pick, if I can back. Right. So that's Iona. You'll see me appear. Right. There we go, with Iona behind. There we go. How clever is that? And but for this year, I aim to keep that subject minimal. And I'm going to release that story. I'm going to make a separate video when I can, because there's all kinds of stuff going on, including a bit of moving. But I will make the video as a story for the subscribers, make it special on Patreon. So this year, I'm still going to make an Iona reference, and but keep this in sequence with this 3-part Barding series. Now, during part 1, we focused on journaling from our inspirations and visions. A lot of doodling there. And then we went on to native poetry, which can be random writing of words as we try to crudely translate our visions. It's very hard because, of course, when we get visions, they're not in words, are they? They are visions. They're still very photographic, and we struggle to put them into words. And then on part 2, with Claire last week, we explored the use of adding sound to our words, and the use of harp was the chosen instrument, and Claire guided through what she does with it. But of course, it's anything musical, anything that makes a sound, banging sticks, making a whistle from wood, tapping a frame drum, it all counts. Now, for this week, yeah, I'm getting hoarse already. Oh, sorry. Oh, this is embarrassing. For part 3, which is today, I wish to explore what prompts our inspirations, our memories, and also prompts from memories of where we may stand, the space that we are in, or the space that we're sitting in, walking in, sometimes running through. And this part 3 Barding series is quite a fringe, really, of folklore. And you may wonder why I include it, but I think there are 2 approaches to folklore, and one really intertwines with the other. So there's no division, really. And the connections being, I call them transitions rather than division. But there is a kind of an academic approach. Let's get an academic picture up. There you go. There's an academic approach that is to research all the pre-written and pre-scribed archives, which can be a lot of fun for a lot of people. And some of those archives are on stone, ancient parchments, wood, and that makes it even more fascinating, especially when people translate this stuff. Now, with many academics, they do have a standard. It's even like an oath, isn't it? That if something hasn't been prescribed, hasn't been scribed down, or it hasn't been pre-written, especially on ancient text, then to a lot of them, everything that's said is just bullshit. And they're worried that this sort of BS can destroy the reputation of the authenticity of the folklore, is what they might say. Anyway, the other approach of folklore can be called pseudo. A lot of people do. The academics do. Very pseudo. They make it up as you go along kind of stuff. And these are inspirations that aroused from divination tools and some of us might call this psychic awareness, and we really indulge in that, but the academics don't like that. A lot of them don't like. But my own resources of what I share with you on nature folklore, they come from listening to oral storytellers. And here's one you might know very well if you've been to Sligo. There's Michael Quirk talking to a group of women from Australia there. And he's tapping away, carving away as he's telling a story about Dagda or Innis Catlin, the Garavog, whatever happens to be the subject he's telling of the day. And so a lot of people will be well and truly familiar with Michael Quirk, I'm sure, who's watching today. And as I was born in England, I lived my life, a lot of my life, raised children in Scotland, lived in the USA. Now I'm in Ireland. So what's happened with me is my storytelling has become a fusion. So it's not exclusively Irish. So forgive me for that, because a lot of the time, a lot of these stories originate before there was actually a nation called Ireland. Plus, when I travel elsewhere, I also pick up the stories in the countries I visit to as well. This was a woman in a tea garden in North Thailand, and I picked up a few stories from her. And the one thing I think we discover when we pick up stories in different places is that the stories are the same all around the world. They're very similar. And the main differences, I think, are character names, different landscape settings, and that was by where the tea garden is. And that kind of changes the mood, doesn't it? Different climates can do the same thing, different latitudes. Different latitudes tend to change the season cycles, the times when season changes. We're so used to in Ireland having a familiarity with season changes of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltner, and Lunacy. But if you go up into Norse countries, that starts getting warped. If you go down to the tropics, that gets warped as well. So we're reflecting the climate and the space that we're in. And from these stories, I've actually visited sites featured in the stories. And you go to sites like this, and tell me in the comments, tell me your experiences here. I find when I go to sites like this, you imagine what it was like. You can actually visually, so you get this vision of people running around, scurrying, doing things. And the stories come alive. It's like a little theater that goes on in your mind. And then as soon as you left that space, it's gone. And I must admit, I do pick up a lot of the stories from that way. But to me, by doing that, what I feel it does is the things I pick up, it reveals flaws and holes in the actual accepted stories that are told, that people have picked up from books and archives. Some of the stuff you see in the landscape and feel and see from your visions, I think, that doesn't make sense according to the writings. That, again, is my approach. And this is what I'm thinking about for this third part, is how much we rely on those visions. And as I say, let's go back to that again. I'm going to be talking about prompts. There we go. We have those ruined cottages. To me, they're prompts. And there might be other things, field, stones of a field, stones of a keep for animals. All these things are prompts that I feel sets up the vision and you relate to the story. And you can, with me, I suppose, because I've got strong Virgo and Capricorn, I'm looking for the practicalities as well as the fantasy. So I see the flaws. People, excuse me, when I come out with explaining what I feel are flaws, people say, hey, you're ruining the stories. And you, by trying to earth them too much and take away the fantasy. And these are the academics that might say that too. So I suppose that's me liking the idea of these folklore stories, not only be fun to hear, but also be useful. And I think this is one of the things that's understated, is how these stories are actually useful in our life. Some people think what's useful is to grab a book, grab a technical paper, grab a how to do something book. But I feel that the mentoring from the stories really helps us through working things out. And that's why I say problem solving at the beginning. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, from listening to stories and having divination experiences like what I said and being inspired on site, I do something to try and justify these inspirations. Of course I do, because A lot of people won't listen unless I've got a book or a reference. So I do go back to the old text and look through them and find out what relates to the visions I do. I know that's cheating, but this is somewhat like the people with Bibles, isn't it? With Bibles, anyone can find a verse or two within a Bible. Doesn't matter what translation they go for, but you can, it seems, if you've got an opinion about something, you can always find a verse or two within the Bible that fits your opinion. And you say, well, it must be true, it's in the Bible. And how many people do that? And it can even be their interpretation of their morality is the way they approach that. And sometimes, sadly, I think people use Bible or religious references to try and establish their sense of morality from selfishness. It seems there's a lot of people, especially today, trying to make selfishness as if that's fitting in with morality. Horrible habit that's coming on, I think. Anyway, the ancient New Age of scribing, we're talking about 5th century onwards. And that's, that's what happened in the islands now. Ireland. So the 5th century, we have the early medieval scribes, which is like this fella here, scribing away with a long piece of parchment. And then you got some traction from the 7th century onwards. It took a while. And before the scriptorians were established, though, all the people had, before they had, well, even when the scribes did the writing, only a small number of people had the education and training to read these things. So the people, everyone else, really had to rely on something else, didn't they? And this is where we bring the prompts in, bring the symbols in, because people can understand that, because that's what they connect together, is what they see, and use prompts. So it's only a small number of population that could do scribing, could read what's written in those scribe scriptures, and have to trust the people that's reading it to them. So that's a bare area. And I was talking with someone this morning on that, how that's transformed, because most people can read now. So what people do, I think, is try to demonstrate that they've actually seen something else in the writings, and you have to join their cult or club or something in order to understand. And there's always a small elite crew that somehow are above everybody else. So I think that practice still goes on in some kind of way. So before the scriptorians, there were the fillet bards, if you've heard about the fillet, and they were trained in memory and how to hold words and understandings. Stuff was passed to them orally. They had to memorize that and repeat it. And it took several years of training. Then they had to train other bards to pass that on. To think that memory was the computer of the ancient times. Wow. Thinking of our memories today. But what was shared, though, without having anything written down before the scribes, really, all that could be shared was what came to imagination, through our inspiration, through the symbols we see, through the prompts we see, and what we experience. I've often wondered about the usefulness and the power of symbolic prompts, such as this. There we go. That's a pict stone, which has got all kinds of symbols, and they meant something to someone. They told people that we call the picts, that told them something, and they could go off and tell someone. They could even perhaps draw it out, maybe, to tell someone else. And that was the communication. It wasn't in sentences. So it seems that prompts were around well before we could form words, well before we could form sentences, paragraphs, articles, all that stuff that we perhaps take for granted now. So it seems the ancient tree languages, that's what I'd love to come to, tree languages. There you go. Now we think of tree languages and Ogham. Think of Ogham trees as prompts. But there's actually ancient tree languages from around the world. And here's a few of them, if you can make sense of the writing there. There's Chinese one there. I can't even read it myself. But those are different catalogues of symbols. So it's not just Ogham. Various countries had a collection, and this is just a few samples. So there's various tree languages. Ogham's not exclusive for that. And we associate trees with Ogham symbols, most of us, I think, watching today. So therefore, we get attracted to those things, don't we? Oh, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. There we go, the trees. There's some trees with some letters, and there's a little bit of Ogham tree alphabet below. Anyway, I've been chatting so long, and I haven't said hello to you since we started. Let's see who's around and see what you're saying about what I've said so far. Good morning. We got Alan, the blue man here. Hello. Claire's popped in, which is great. Hello from Claire. Lovely to see and hear you. Sorry, I noticed looking at that, the green screen stuff is sort of fading away. I got the lights strong. I know it's very cloudy through the window, so excuse the green screen breaking up a little bit at the moment. We got Terry Slack Hardwick here. Good morning from Maryland. Unable to watch in real time this morning. We'll catch up. Looking forward to it. And there's Joey Sparks here. Good morning from Indiana. Very sunny here this morning. That's great. Always lovely to see it. Gives a smile on our face, doesn't it? Fabulous. So thank you, those of you who are watching. Now, going on with Ogham a bit, let's get the Ogham sticks in the background for the green screen. That might help as far as the, well, I don't know, it might help as far as the wobbliness. Let's see. It's nice to have a bit of a change anyway. Oh, no, I seem to have disappeared. Let's see if I'm going to change this a bit. Oh, that sort of improved it a bit, but it might have messed up the... I'm going to try this again. This gives me a bit more balance there, isn't it? That's a bit better. Let's hold it at that and see what happens. Right. So my first connection here to Ogham symbols, well, it was in the 50s. And unfortunately, I haven't got any pictures of that. And that's well before I was a teen. And then as in my teens, I dabbled with Ogham Divination as a toy. And that's why I've got that up. There we go. I'm going to disappear. Show you a closer one of that. Let's see, comments. Got Joey Sparks there. Right, and so that's what I dabbled with, I think, in my teens, and kind of as a toy, really. And now it wasn't until I met my stonemason boss on Iona, Attie McKechnie, and I actually managed to get a friend to send me a picture. He's the man in the middle with the kilt, the bigger man in the middle. That's Attie McKechnie, and I learned a deeper story of Ogham language, and I've been passionate about it ever since. On the left of him is Andy Campbell when he was young, and the woman that's with Andy in the entrance there, Helen, she was actually my children's school teacher when they first went to school. So some interesting stories about her. Anyway, I will show you something. All I can find on Attie, if you can read this for a minute, that tells you about him and what he said about the Rossamulfoot. Terrific storyteller. And as I say, he was a boss for me on Iona. And I'll give a second to read that a bit. Now, Attie was a mason's apprentice during the 30s when Iona Abbey was being... it was being restored. And I assume most people get there at least once in their life to Iona Abbey. And so that's it. This is the restoring. This is what the Abbey looked like before the restorers came in. This is in the 1930s. Attie was very fluent in the Gàidhlig. He was a good Gàidhlig speaker. And he was very passionate about the language and its origins. And he also had a huge passionate interest in the way that the early medieval scribes used and changed and created the old Scottish language, which is very close to the Gàidhlig in Ireland, the Irish. And through him, I first learned the tree language connections to Ogham, which I found fascinating since. He told me the stories of how the ghaels and the picts came together and how it's through Ogham and through the tree language way of sharing Ogham, because they had their own kind of carved language that they managed to have a good communication. And So the tree language found an archiving system by using symbols. And he had some lovely stories, and I'm not going to tell them today, but it's quite amazing for me to connect to Ogham on a Scottish pilgrimage island that hosts just a few hawthorn trees, a few small hazel trees, a few imported beech trees. There you are, and that's the village. That shows you a few of the trees that you'll find on Iona. Very few there. Now, last year, excuse me again, I really got the old cough. I told my version of the ghaels bringing the tree language to a land that's called Gàidhlig. I'm going to have a back cloth of this later, I think. Gàidhlig, Argyll, Scotland. But this year I'm going to skip most of that, and I'm also going to try and make an exclusive recording for Patreon and subscribers and other subscribers. But that story is about what happened when the tree cultured ghaels, because even the ghael, the word ghael, if you go backwards through languages, it means people of the trees. And then we got the farming Picts, because the Picts kind of brought over a tradition that probably originated from the Middle East, even Babylonia, of settled farming. So they had a whole different culture. So you've got these two cultures coming together. And it's amazing how Iona got a link to all this, and also the language. And these Picts, they had a rune style. There we go. There's a Pict stone. I always forget the name when I present it. What's it? It's near Aberdeen. I'm foggy on that. It begins with B. It's stuck in the housing estate. But I love this photograph of it. I'll think of it later on as we go, because I'm going to show this a few more times as we go along through this. It begins with B. I just can't think of its name at the moment. But it's quite a famous one. It's about 12 miles from Aberdeen, and I can't even think of the town that it's in. No, it's on the tip of my tongue. I just can't quite get the name of it at the moment. Someone here might be able to tell me what that is, because there's a load of Pict stones in that area. Anyway, there's a story, really, it's all about that. The ghaels and the Picts is a story of how two tribes formed the language so they could speak to each other. Now, at this stage, we're talking about communication through symbol prompts. Here's another Pict stone here. That's an illustration of Pict stone. Look at that symbols. They're prompts in order to communicate something. They're not words, they're not sentences, they're not paragraphs, they're prompts. And I think this is the actual stone here that's a graphic of. That's what the graphic's taken of, and that's near the stone I showed you earlier. Now, it's quite simple to follow through this. The early medieval scribes, they attempted to unravel symbol language, and of course they were scribes. They were writing linear stuff. They'd learned how to do Latin and Greek and how to just do it in a straight line on a piece of parchment. So they were trying to work out, how did you get those symbols into that? How can you unravel this language, the oral plus symbols, into a linear way? Because they were working with their Latin and Greek understanding that they'd been taught of. But the craft did preserve some of the roots of the Ogham that they transformed into Latin communication. And that's, in a way, I'm not going to go into it much today, but the Gàidhlig language, the Irish, the Gael language, it's really how that came together, is being able to put letters to these symbols that they recognized was like the letters they used in Latin and Greek. And it eventually came out into its own Gaelic language. So that got preserved, and it's obviously still spoken by people today, and it's reviving because, as I show in other nature folklore stories, it's a great language for talking about conditions, about circumstances, and about your imagination, whereas Latin and Greek, if you go through it, it's talking about things. So, when you're talking about conditions, that's what these symbol prompts are doing. They're really trying to outline what are conditions going in, like if it's dark or windy, hot, cold, that type of thing, maybe. Weather was important, of course. Anybody, well, let's see what you're saying so far. There's a comment or two coming up. Myra's here from California, Myra Kelly, from Berkeley, where the sun is still waiting to rise beyond the mountain. Lovely to have you here, Myra. Thanks very much. Terrific. So, the Gael and Pig merging story is very complex to explain, but as I said, I will compile a special for this for the subscribers as soon as I can get space to do that. So, sorry to keep you waiting on that. But really was not the only alphabet. It wasn't the only language that started with trees, and that's what I showed with an example with portions of alphabets from other countries I showed a few minutes ago. So perhaps I should reword that several languages were probably born from trees. I'm talking about how the scribes took these symbols, and they would have taken the tree symbols and somehow integrated them into the creation of the Gàidhlig language. The Chinese, take the Chinese language and the Japanese from the bottom to the top. They're bringing in pen marks, but before those pen marks, there was a very basic tree language. So they transformed into that. And you probably find there's other languages around the world that the trees were an important symbol because that's something they could see. They could identify differences. Very difficult to identify as many differences with rock because tree identification, I would say, is a lot easier than geology identification. So I think that's why there's a popularity. Also, the tree's so important for life and lifestyles. Probably plants, herb plants, birds. I've heard of languages come together with birds, certainly North America with birds and animals. Very important symbols that formed a language that came in, when they started integrating the white man language, the Latin and Greek. They could bring it all together. So symbols created language, and language born from trees. Our poetry is born from our inspiration, from our symbols, from our doodles. When we do those little doodles that I was talking about in part 1, we turn those into language. We apply them to our language. We're taught that we do linear, and that's the process of our barding. Now, there's one profound act of nature that seems to give clues of how this symbolism comes about. But it may be a bit of a coincidence. And that is when, say, I'm going to use this as an example. When lightning hits trees, let's see if I can get onto this one. Here we go. There's a nice one. Tree being hit by lightning there. And ancient people, when they saw that, they would actually draw a T, because that's something they could do, a T. They could get 2 sticks. It's very easy to put 2 sticks together and form a T. And I find it's an amazing coincidence that T shape is used, even though these are Latin and Greek origins. We have words like thunder, Thor, and Thursday, all related very much to that lightning. I say coincidence because the Gaelic word for Thor and thunder and Thursday, Deardun, I think it is, or Dearduin, I don't know, something like that in the Gaelic. Someone help me out on that. I think it's Dearduin. I'll remember it in a minute. Anyway, I do wonder about that T letter. This is just one illustration. Was that T a prompt? And if you ever go to, where is it? Tory Island. There's the tall T cross there. There you go. There's a T for you. An very ancient T, and that's on Tory Island. And so did humans focus on creating prompts as a tool for communication? That's the big question I've been muttering about for the last so many minutes. Was this what was used before we had classically formed language? So to me, it looks tree languages may have started with creating impressions of trees, maybe trying to do an impression of trees using sticks or stones, and even making impressions on clay. There you go. Here's someone trying to do some symbolism by baking some clay to preserve an image. And there's a tree in clay there. So another nice coincidence when we talk of ancestry and languages, when we talk, say, with having a conversation about language and our history and our ancestry, what do we talk about? We got roots and we got branches, don't we? Our ancestry has lots of roots and branches, so we do communicate that in our conversation. We have roots. We certainly do have roots, and there's branches of the family, and we have roots in our education and branches. It's amazing how we use that reference anyway. That's the sort of point I'm running circles around. Here we go. That's it. Well, there's the spelling from Adrian there. Fantastic. Deirdre. There we go. And I've seen some other spellings of that, so I'm going to have to get a handle on that one. Right. Very fascinating how this connects to trees are done. As I say, I'm just waffling from prompts in the landscape, as I was talking about earlier. And the Picts of Scotland, they now the Picts as well, they have very close connections. I should have a map somewhere. It's incredible. You talk about migrations. There's the Picts up there at the top, the Dalrata Island, which was Scotia in a way. Some people call that Scotia. And but the Gàels were the Dalrata and the Scotia Island. But the Pict really has a huge connection down at northwest England. The Britons there, the Wales, and we've got Cornwall. And there's Brittany as well. And then you've got the Angles and Saxons, which I've talked about in other nature folklore. But that whole farming culture and even the language went through there in the West, very close. So it's quite all those in the Picts there and all that red part, all those people, they were very well known. They became well known in ancient times for their rune carvings, their symbol carvings. They were quite advanced. They'd obviously brought that over. Somehow there was a connection that had traveled over from Babylonia, maybe Middle East. Even some people say the Scythians. But it's not known. None of this rune style lettering. It's done with axes with a sharp instrument. There isn't really a connection to the Latin and the Greek. That it was a symbol communication. Now, this seems to have been going on, making the symbolic language from about 8000 BC until certainly 1000 AD. And it was about 1000 AD when the Picts became fully integrated in with the Gàels and the Vikings. Everybody was all merging together. By 1000 AD, it was a whole different tribe, just with all this merging. But the actual Pict name, that probably dated from about 50 BC until they became integrated with the Gàels. I'm going to talk more about the origin of Pict name for another special that I'll one day create for all subscribers. However, there's several things even way back in the Tuatha De Danann stories of Ireland that to me sound very Pictish in their tales. And maybe I'll talk about that on a special as well. Now, of interest to us today is really the Ogham. That's what I'm trying to use as a reference. It does have, let's see, I'm trying to find something on the Ogham. Anyway, the Ogham is seen on East Scotland stones. I showed you one earlier. It's also on Shetland stones. And it links up with the Welsh, the Cornish, and the Breton in many ways. So I'm trying to find this. Here we go. Let's try this. Well, there's supposed to be a picture. It hasn't turned up yet. There we go. This is blade cut. Let's bring this up again. That's in that stone. Oh, I had the name of it a second ago. Now I'm brain fogged again. This is before the housing estate was built, when they were stuck in the field. So this is a very old picture. And see that you got the Ogham on the left and you got those other symbols, very much cut with iron blades. And the one thing with the Picts and certainly with a lot of the Breton tribes, certainly were the Welsh, and even the Vikings. Because they were doing those blade cuts, the one thing they could do was cut the letters such as K, W, V, X, Y, and Z, which are not letters that appear in the Old Gàidhlig, which is quite intriguing. How they must have used to do that, sticks, I believe, and carving out. Interesting, obviously, carving on the stone on that. But this is something that was quick. To put the language, just use iron blades, crisscross. You got the K, W, V, X, Y, Z, and that could all appear. A whole different approach. Brandybutt, that's it. That's the Brandybutt stone. There we go. That's what that's called, Brandybutt stone. So anyway, runestone language, and just to show that the Vikings bring in that there's some Vikings to illustrate that as well. The other thing was the merging. Well, I thought I was going to talk about him. That's MacAlpin. He was kind of the last Pict king, and after him, that was really when the Gàels and the Picts were completely merged. I think that was about 1000 AD. Now, sometimes I talk about yin and yang and plant growth, and within that you got the feminine dark network of roots, fungi, life forms, all in the dark underworld, and very yin when you're under the ground with all this network going on. And that's balanced by the highly competitive yang, the male individual fighting for light in the upper world. Now, it seems like the ancient Pict ways and the now modern Christian ways in this part of the world has become something like that. Even so, what finally brought the Gàels and Picts together into unison seems to be they needed to come together to, I showed it earlier, I wonder why I had this picture. The Gàels and Picts came to try and push the Vikings back. There was too much of them. They couldn't do it individually. So that's why you got this alliance, and they had to find a way of communicating each other in order to find this alliance. Because the Vikings seemed to be much bigger than they were, even together. Very tough time. So the Picts Gàel merger did own formation. Eventually, through that unity and alliance, first it was Alba, which was the west of what's now Scotland. And eventually, when the Scotia people were expanding, the whole country became Scotland, thanks mainly, I think, to Columcille. And Alba came about. Again, we can bring MacAlpin on MacAlpin. He's very much responsible for the origin of Alba. He wasn't the first king by any means, but this was 843 when Alba was starting to come. He was the last king of the Picts, 843. And handed over. Anyway, he was a Gaelic-speaking man. He had learned what the scribes were doing, and but it was during his reign what remained of the Pict language really disappeared. It was then Old Gaelic, and that was in the scribing, in the talking, and that's what happened after the Gàels and Picts came underway. And it all started with prompts and symbols. Now, a few hundred years after the 9th century, after the merging of the two cultures were complete, obviously they didn't keep the Vikings back. The Viking culture came in and merged. It took about 300 years for them to merge. And so when you got the Picts, the Gàels, the Vikings, that I think is when we got Scotland. And the ancient Scotian name remained as a fascinating honor of that. Do ask questions in the comments about all this. Anyway, what did the scribes make of all this as this was progressing? What did they make of this? There was developments from the prompts. They were dealing with prompts in the 5th century when they got going. And then from the 6th century to the 9th century, all this was coming into some kind of order. So what do they make of this? And the scribing didn't really get going into being a popular industry, and that was lucrative. They had to make this lucrative. There had to be something in it. Columbkill, I think, was really the man who got this really going. And there's some Columbkill scribes there. I think there's a Columbkill scribe, an artist impression, St. Columba, as he was in the story. Now, there are stories that Bridget of Kildare had to go at scribing several years before Columbkill, and even Patrick. But there's no evidence being found of that. And I'm going to talk about Breda, Bridget, and scribing during the Imbolc series next spring. But before Bridget and Patrick and other monastic founders of that time, they all eventually got to be learned in Latin. But you would expect they would have scribing. If they were, Patrick was learned in Latin. They say he was a Roman. He had Roman origins, or his family were Roman origins. It's said that there was a Roman influence somehow in the Bridget line. You would think if they had that training and that scribing, there would be some books available, but no, there isn't. There isn't. It wasn't until the scriptorians of Columbkill, when they really got going in Doro, in Offaly, and in Derry, the scribing got going in Ireland, but it was much more profound when it got over to Iona. Now, tree languages, symbol languages like the Ogham, and the engravings by the Picts, and even the engravings by the Norse people, I'm sure would have been amazing prompts from inspirations. And that helped to the understanding of local thinking and beliefs. And this is what the scribes were trying to interpret. What was the local understanding, thinking, and beliefs? How were they sharing this with symbols? They say that the scribes were taking oral language, but what was this oral language? It was the use of these prompts. Now, I'm using this as an example, the connecting point. I'm going to talk about this very soon to relate how this ancient way of bringing inspiration into a book, into a scribed parchment, how you can do that yourself from your own visions in the same way that these ancient people were getting their visions. They had nothing else. They didn't have to run to a book to confirm what they were thinking and believing. This was a whole process. And I think that's what fascinates me, that I find really beautiful, what's really native, and also very wholesome. And I'm going to talk about that a lot more. So continue with this. The scribes got together. They were already educated in their Greek and Latin, so they could rescribe the Psalms and the Gospels, David's Psalms, of course. And all the time, the scribes were learning, developing, and teaching the linear language that they had learned, that they were doing with the Gospels, and trying to apply that to the local equivalents of the things that people believed in, because people in the Middle East, they were believing in that through their holy books. They were believing in the Psalms for guidance. They were believing in the Gospels for guidance. But local people were believing in other things. They were believing in the Sidhe. They were believing, I don't know, fairies is a French word, but they were believing in stuff like the Sidhe in the same way, but they couldn't get this stuff down into scriptures. They couldn't do the linear language. They could only use the symbols. And what they were interested in, because they didn't have gadgets like today, they were interested in weather changes, farming, and the cycles around that. So the oral people learned, they were probably more familiar with one thing I noticed in Ireland and west of Scotland is there was a huge familiarity with circular and spiral types of language. You know, this is the linear that the scribes were doing, but this is from the Book of Ballymote, by the way. But this is what was really coming out of the people. And this was obviously found in stones, but these scribes made it more neat. They were also sound in forms of mathematics and geometry. So they were interpreting some of the stuff that was being told to them. And through this, they could make charting that sort of fitted into being like the seasons. People do this with astrology charts, don't they? So you do this charting. So through this familiarity with beliefs, through the changes in seasons. So everything was thought about with circles and spirals. And that was that's where a lot of language seemed to start with. Now, Ogham was, here's it. This is, I think this is, there you go. There's where it's carved. I think that's the one in the Mound of Hostages, or is that Loch Crew? It's just one of those stones, and you got these spirals. So that was communicating something in spirals. It wasn't a straight line. It wasn't linear like we read from a book. But that was how things were interpreted. Now, Ogham was written from the ground up originally. So it looks like you got a line of symbols in Ogham, and it's like a tree growing with the branches. So there was a relationship here of how to put symbols together and actually say something if you put the symbols together from the ground up towards the light. So translate that into a linear form must have been quite a task. How do you turn that horizontal into a linear form? It may seem straightforward to us now because we're familiar with how to write. And this is what happened with the Ballymote people. That see that they've made them go horizontal there instead of straight up. But at the time, people were not familiar. That must have been a huge challenge, huge task. And so going to the Brandwood stone again, this is going to the artwork of this there. And there you go. There's a recognition of the Pict symbols there. That's on the right of the stone, and you got the Ogham there to the left of the stone that looks very much like Ogham, and someone's trying to translate it in Welsh, Irish Ogham form. And we don't know which way around it was. Did the Picts pick up some Ogham and said, okay, we're going to add this to our symbol language? Or was it the Picts that actually taught the Ogham? Now, I'm going to go through it on another episode, but a lot of people say Ogham originates in Ireland, but the word Ogham actually is very strong in the Welsh language, far older than the Gàidhlig language. So did the Ogham actually start in Wales? Very much a controversy, and I'll talk about that in another nature folklore. But putting all this together as a scribing craft, it seemed to have been very epic at the time. Columkill scribing time was 6th century, and then by the 9th century, the Pict culture and language was advancing into the flow of the linear, and then we had the Vikings come along, and this is what was happening in the 9th century. It was all thrown together, and this is how scribing was becoming, something like that. 9th century, it advanced into that. It was bringing all the symbols together. And then there was a sentence would start off with something like that, as you've perhaps seen from the Book of Kells, that type of thing. And then it was linear. So it was bringing all the prompts together, all those symbols together. And this is the way it seemed to bring all of the ancient languages into perhaps a modern form. So Pict culture and language came fully immersed into Gaelic language. Albo as a country was formed. And so where did the Ogham go after all that? Now, it seems that between the 7th and 9th century, it lost its use as a prompting language. And it was used from, I don't know, sometimes 7th, 8th, 9th language onwards, right up until the 1930s. The use was what I call pissing stones. There we go. It's a cat on it, something like that. The inscriptions were no longer prompts and guiding directives. The scribes were now creating books to be used as tools for order and doctrine. And this sent another use for the Ogham. Ogham evolved into being used, as I say, as pissing stones. As I mentioned in another nature folklore session, they were stones that were used to mark boundaries and territory. And they would include the names of stewards, keepers, and the owners of the land. So that was the marking. I say pissing stones because I say when animals, dogs, cats, they'll piss up somewhere to mark their territory. So this is what the Ogham was eventually used for, was to mark the boundaries of where land is done. So my opinion is that Ogham changed from being an accompanying tree guide. It was like a mother culture of the ghaels and the picts, all the symbolism, and it became into servitude as a boundary tool, as part of the new Christian ruled part of this world. So Ogham had changed from being a divining guiding tool into really becoming a commanding slave, an incredible transition. So a lot of the Ogham mystery has been picked up, as I say, in the Book of Ballymote, which I showed. There we go, Book of Ballymote again, where it's got into scribing. But I present that during another folklore session, I talk about the Ballymote. But to round up this Barding series, I'm going to wind up now. I suggest using the aid of prompts. And just to finish this off, let's get another picture to the background here. Oh, I want another green screen picture. I must have something. Let's see. Let's have an aerogale one. We haven't had the aerogale one. There we go. As a typical aerogale picture. I'll conclude and wrap this all up, the whole 3 episodes. So I suggest use the aid of prompts anyway. Personally, I like the Ogham symbols, the original 20 Ogham symbols, that is, the fancy extra 5 that appeared from the 11th century, and they appeared in the Book of Ballymote. So that's really part of the transition that was used for the convenience of scribes so they can make it linear. But the 20 symbols, the original stuff from the ground upwards, I like using those as symbolism. And great as prompts, especially in relation to trees. Each tree we can use as a prompt. And the trees themselves become memories and prompts themselves. You can take each tree. And especially if you come across these in real life, it can give you all sorts of prompts. Some of the basic ones. I mean, if you see an oak, with an oak, you see that being a leader, justice, balance, roots really deep. It's very commanding. We think of druids and oaks. There's a lot of leadership there, and you can get gales and winds, and they just don't blow down. And then the hazels. There's so many stories of the salmon of knowledge that had eaten the hazelnuts, and so we got the wisdom from the hazel. So these are different prompts that are grateful in the Ogham. Beth the birch, we have new beginnings, and the birch is a foundation tree. When a birch comes into an area through the wind and the birch comes up, then all the other trees decide, there's a woodland, there's a forest being formed, let's join in. So when we see a birch, we can think of new beginnings. So these things that we see about trees in their normal relationship in the earth, it gives us prompts. Well, if the trees are doing that, that means this, that means that. And I think that's how we start off the prompts, how we get these prompts. We see these trees doing different things. Every species of tree seems to have a different purpose in nature. And we can relate to that. Perhaps our purpose can be that. And that's what I feel that happens through the 20 symbols of the Ogham. They're sort of memory prompts, psychic prompts, probably a bit of each, however you interpret that. But I think it's easy with trees. I find it easy with trees to associate a wisdom condition and a prompt with each tree species. And I'm going to talk more about that in the Ogham session on the 16th of January, when that's part of the divination series. So we'll come back to that. Fascinating. I love it. Anyway, I regard these tree wisdom conditions as following the annual solar season. When we're talking earlier today, people have come up with these pseudo sort of Ogham calendars, don't they? Some put 13 symbols out of the 20. Some put the entire 20 into a solar calendar. But what I'll be talking about when I talk of the divination, I've talked about it before, but I'm fascinated by the work of an ancient language researcher and scholar from Trinity College, Damien McManus. His books are well out of print. He's retired now, and he doesn't lecture very much, but he made an incredible sense of the original 20 Ogham symbols, with what may have even been overlooked by the ancient medieval scribes. I think they could have been lazy because they were employed, well, I wouldn't say employed, they were sponsored, they had patrons that asked them to scribe stuff, but the patrons, they really wanted these scribes to make them look good. They wanted the scribes to actually write stuff that would raise their position through their ancestry and through their hero deeds and stuff like that. And so the scribes were really controlled by that. So as far as accuracy goes, they were limited by what their patrons would allow them to do. So I think there's some errors in the Ogham because of that influence. And luckily, I think it's amazing through the research there of Damien McManus, he's kind of put the 20 symbols into a proper annual cycle that isn't just a sort of divination cycle like an astrology chart. And when I go through it again, I think you'll see sense with this. But I think it's lovely because it one tree follows to another. And before we know it, we've gone through all of the seasons of the year, which the scribes, what they did with 20 Ogham, they were all over the place, such as ash, where really they have ash in the wrong time, straight after willow. Cherry blossom comes after the willow leaves, that type of stuff. Anyway, we'll talk about that in January. But the medieval scribes, I suppose their translating was awkward for the reasons I told. But the Ogham is a great prompting tool, and I'm going to talk about that. 27th of February, when I open the tree season series, I'm going to talk a lot more about Ogham as a prompting tool as well. So I'm winding up this short barding series. Do not suggesting never fear your inspirations. Never fear the recallers from your memories when you're standing in space. I believe we're able to recall memories of spaces and of situations that may be beyond our own memories. We feel what has been there before. Everything seems to leave a signature. So be brave. Don't be intimidated by scholars who mock and bully what you tell from these visual experiences. And with respect to the academic research world, indeed, call your inspirations fiction, just to be respectful to what they are. They regard what they do as facts, non-fiction. But what is non-fiction? It's the stuff that's been archived and approved as reference by the researchers. But how did it get there in the first place? Before there's non-fiction, you have to have fiction. You have to be visionary. There has to be visions to write about. So vision is the ancient thing. That's where it's all seeded. It's from vision, it's from fiction that we get non-fiction that creates libraries, that creates scholars. So be proud of your fiction. It's the truth. So your visions, memories, express them quickly. Jot down your doodles. And then from your doodles in your journaling, write down words. Doesn't matter if your words follow grammar. It doesn't matter if they follow the punctuation. It doesn't even matter if they're different languages. Bunch of words you can put together. You find you're just putting a few languages together. Don't worry, just get them out. Weave your visions into words the best way you can quickly. Get that first native draft down. And from that spontaneity, as you begin to craft the words or script, think about introducing sound like we did with the harp, because our words are very limited, but sounds add so much. And as I say, I did use, we had the lovely Claire on, who used the harp, but use percussion. I'm taking this from the fawn thing. Look at the man there. He's playing a bit of birch there, isn't he? He's got a drum, but he's banging away some birch branch there. You can use that. Simple percussion. And whistles will work too. So anything to get that sound around, because it helps the flow and the construction of your words as well. Now, today we got recording gadgets and devices, but do not lose the tradition of prompts. Rather than try and record something down on a memorizing gadget or in your phone, try and doodle something from your vision. Never lose that craft. It's like, no, don't lose the ancient language. Don't lose the Gàidhlig language, etc. Use some of those words. And so don't, the basic prompting, the sounds, the doodles. Yeah, it is nice, I suppose, to record stuff down on your phone. How often do you wipe it out or lose it? I think it's great if you have the drawings as problems of your visions and your memories. And I believe the Ogham, it connects us great. It's a great system for connecting and prompting language. And the Ogham set of symbols, they created, they give a bit of order. They are in an order. So a great prompting tool set is the Ogham. So I hope these 3 sessions on Barding have helped you to approach expressions that come, as I say, start from your tree sanctuary. And I also posted on Facebook a couple of days ago, the number 1 essential purpose of stories is to enchant the magic of our memories, the magic of the memories of other people, the memories of spaces. All that, really, stories that come from all that. And that's people, places, memories, and we make the stories and we enchant them. We enchant with them. And we all eventually return to Earth. We all go, we're not here forever. The water separates, goes back to the water, and bodies go back to the Earth, and even some up into the air. But the memories that we leave behind, the memories of our stories, they never die. So memories are not of words, they're visions. And so as humans, we challenge ourselves to weave these memories into words, into art, into drawings, into composing music, and even into dance, into movement. And often we find that this interpretation is much more than being entertaining with pretty stories. What we do through our interpretation of visions, they actually become maps. They become guides, and our stories certainly become mentors to ourselves and even to the people we talk to. And through being mentoring and referring to stories, it's amazing how many problems are solved. And I was talking about with someone when I was in the Scouts. Sometimes I'm in a situation and I have this think, and we had a wonderful scoutmaster, skipper, as you call them, Skip. And sometimes, even now, I'm a lot older than him when I was in my teens, but sometimes I'm in a situation and I think, what would Skip be thinking now? What would Skip be saying now? And I think that's the story. Sometimes I will bring up a story and the way that flowed. And it's amazing how that can help you through a situation. So everything archived in university, everything was once a seed of vision that didn't have words. Everything starts with what is called fiction. So therefore, I believe that fiction is honesty, is truth, it's the pure nakedness of life, I believe. So happy, enchanting barding. And before I go, let's see what your words are from that. We've got Mrs. Seven Serpents here saying something that isn't coming up on the screen. There it is. Back at ya. Myra's saying something wonderful. And the body too, through dance, speaks in an ancient and visionary language of enchantment. That's why I mentioned dance. And I was thinking of you there. The old divining tool. Very important. And so there, we're good to see you from the YouTube. Fantastic. Catching live at last a bit. Chandler's here has asked a question. Merge alongside its users a written letter set, or did one appear before the other? I think if you go through this and listen to it again, it was kind of like an evolution. A little while ago, towards the beginning, I showed that the Ogham is not the only tree language in the world. and that there's all kinds of tree languages that come out of identification of trees. Trees, I find, is an easy thing to work out the differences, even if we don't know that it's an oak or an ash. We know that by words now. But ancient people would have known by looking at the different leaves, the structures, and the bark, and also what they use the wood for. And they would have known all that. So each one of those could have become a symbol. And so that gives a lovely prompt, because by learning about a tree and what it does and how we use it, then that becomes communication to ourselves. Like I was saying with birch, when you got birch comes in the wind, they grow trees, all the other seeds and the birds, birds start sitting on the birch, and they start shitting, and in their shit maybe seeds of hawthorn, and you can perhaps get what's that? The jaybird. Imagine the jaybird comes along. What do they shit out? Acorns. So an oak comes up. So that's so we think of new beginnings with the birch. Sorry. Sorry, I don't know. Sorry about this every now and again. But with the oak, with the hazel, for instance, it's an amazing nutrition with hazel. So it alerts the mind if you're well nourished. So you got all the wisdom with that. With rowan, just from the fragrance and the enchantment, we can go with that. With the willow and the connection with water, all these things we learn about, and they become symbols. They become prompts, and then we do little doodles like we do in our journals. And that eventually, if you collect 20 of those from 20 trees, you make a bit of order out of that. So suddenly you've got all these symbols you can put together. And what happened when, as I say at the time, thanks to the scribes, actually with their Latin and Greek, they could put letters together. So I think that's when the Ogham came together as a connection with the attempt to make words. But what happened was they then evolved from being prompts into being sentences, being put on these pissing stones, as I call them, the mark boundaries. So there's all these evolutions going on. And I think it's a mistake to think of Ogham just being a tree language. I think the Ogham might have come out of tree language, but I think the Ogham might have even been applied to birds, the different animals. But we know it as the trees because we've got more familiarity. We certainly have 20 trees around us, a lot easier than identifying the birds. And that's just I think what I want. I hope that answers that anyway. That's sort of backing up what I've been saying through this great historical storytelling, and hoping, as I say, I was trying not to be historical, but making ancient references as a justification of the purpose of prompts. Ray, I think you've got all questions out. Anything else anybody would like to say before you go off to do some more enchantment barding? I better tell you what's coming up. As I say, thank you for those people that are supporters that managed to help me fund this. Subscribe to Nature Folklore. I don't know why that's come up, but it has indeed. I'm trying to trying to clear the pictures here so I can carry on to tell you what's coming up. There we go. Next week or the following week's Patreon. Oh, there we go. Let's get back to some pictures. Right, next week, starting a new series next week. And coming up, it's the first of a 4-part series of the Yule season. And it's Mischief and Mystery. And it's reminding me, I'm going to see if we can get Jim Ledwith this year from the Orchid Maud Mummers, because that's one of the things I'll be covering. But the intent here is to share less familiar nature-based observations, gratitude, celebrations, recognition, and the winter tree traditions, also caroling, mumming, folk drama, all that good stuff. So that's that's next week with the mayhem and mischief. Anyway. It's very different in the USA because mumming in the USA and Newfoundland is a very different interpretation. It's very folk drama here. And then the second part on the 12th, I don't have any pictures for this, But we're going to have reindeer deer folklore. That was very popular last year. Very helpful, especially through the winter season. This is a popular subject during the last 10 years. It's been growing, even though it is ancient. The folklore is ancient, but in the last 10 years, people have really been getting into the reindeer folklore. So I'm going to be sharing stories and inspirations such as Ocean the Bard, Ellen the Deer Goddess, and a few more deer-related tales. And then 19th of December is going to be part 3, which is going to be the Yule log tales, the Grand Conception, all that good stuff. Part 4 is going to be after Christmas Day, so I'll tell you more about it once we're well into December. I'll talk about it closer at the time. Anybody with any more comments? There's one more come in. Typical. I didn't think I'd run that overtime, but I am. There we go. Who's this, Myra? Thank you very much, Grandpa. Island, our hearts are warm, imagination soaring. Thanks very much, and thank you for being with us. Thank you very much. Hope so well. Oh, Cynthia Willis has appeared. Where did she appear from? Working, but will stay as long as I can. I'm just finishing up, Cynthia, so if you ever get back to the beginning of the archive, I hope you find this fascinating, especially as you're a very inspired person yourself, and you hear all these stories in your hospice situation. Issued it. I no missed it. As I say, you can go back to the archive and go through that and all these different things. And I think you'll relate to a lot of this, Cynthia, that I've been saying. So thank you for putting up with just me without guests today. And if you're watching, talked about the archive is going to be there. And I have some comments from that. I may take a while to answer your comments this time because I've got guests waiting for me. So I'm going to be with them for a little while. Then I'll come back in a couple of hours' time or so and answer your comments. So excuse my delay there. Click the bell icons on YouTube, of course, and have a safe week full of all the inspirations, lots of wonder, and all those lovely enchantments. Thank you for joining. It's been fun to present this to you, despite my hoarse throat. So until next Sunday, play well. That's all I got today. So thank you all and have a healthy, great week. Bye. Bye.